everybody. I would like to call the September 28th meeting of the City of Ann Arbor Environmental Commission meeting to order at 7:06. Matt, will you please call roll?
I will. Commissioner Apple.
Here.
Councilmember Frenzel.
Here.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Here.
Commissioner Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Hanna.
Here.
Commissioner Hutton.
Here.
Commissioner Morocco. Commissioner Appleyard, here for Mr. Mursky. Commissioner Needham. Commissioner Rigo.
Here.
Commissioner Skinner. Commissioner Slavic. And Councilmember Smith.
Present.
You have a quorum.
All right, wonderful. We have before us a draft of tonight's agenda. I have a couple of amendments that I would like to make to it. I would like to add a discussion of the city administrator's memo concerning solid waste after the Allen Creek tree line resolution, and I would also like to add metrics under the committee reports. Are there any other additions or corrections? Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
As amended, I do.
Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Apple, all in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved as amended. We do not have any minutes this evening. And I'm guessing we don't have anyone here to make public comment unless you have something else you'd like to tell us. Okay, then we can move on to new business. And we have a presentation this evening about the Treeline Allen Creek Master Plan.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk to you tonight about the tree line and where we are right now. I'm Connie Pulsifer. I am the project manager for the city for this project. I work with Matt Nod in the systems planning unit. And with me tonight from my project team is Oliver Kiley from Smith Group JJR. He is the project manager counterpart from our consultant team. So we're really happy to be here and give you an update. Before we get started, I would like to thank Commissioner Graham from the Environmental Commission representative on our project Citizen Advisory Committee for his work in helping guide this plan throughout the last 18 months. So this has been almost a 2-year effort, and thank you, Commissioner, for your help with that. So we're going to get started. I'm assuming you can see these on your screen. Is that right?
Yep.
All right. And it is frozen. Let's see if we can get this unfrozen. All right. So tonight we'd like to give you an overview of the project, talk a little bit about the framework plan, what is a framework plan, talk about implementation and next steps. So this project was previously known as the Allen Creek Greenway. It just went through a name change. It's now called the Tree Line, Allen Creek Urban Trail, which is much more descriptive of what this really is. And this idea for an urban trail and improvements to the Allen Creek floodplain have been discussed for nearly 20 years in the community. There's been several reports written about the community's vision for this. And the difference this time is City Council identified this as a priority project back in 2016, and they recognized that we have really insufficient non-motorized connections and opportunities within the community, connecting the Huron River to downtown and to the Ross South core of the university's athletic campus. So they charged staff with developing a master plan for this, where we could actually dig deep and look at the feasibility of the urban trail. It had a lot of vision statements come out from the community in the last 20 years, but our charge was to look at how was this really possible and how could we do it. They allocated funding for us to bring a consultant team on board, and we chose a consultant team that has a lot of experience with urban trails. So if you go into downtown Detroit, a lot of the urban trails you're seeing in Detroit are the work of Smith Group JJR. So right here in our community, they were able to help us with this project as well. So first I want to talk about the project study area and the context. The north boundary of this phase of the project is Main Street at the border-to-border trail, so it would connect to a regional trail system. And border-to-border trail then connects to the statewide Iron Bell Trail system. So it was really important in this project to make that regional and statewide connection. And I will point out, just so you know, throughout the evening and all the presentations, north is to the right. So
Okay.
different than what many of you are used to, but it just works out that way. That is a long project. The south boundary is at South State Street at Stimson, kind of down near the Salvation Army. And City Council did pass a resolution suggesting there be a phase 2 of this project that connects this phase 1 effort down to the city boundary along State Street to Ellsworth. So once that funding is allocated in the CIP, we could see a second phase coming online. So we like to say this project is all about connecting the dots. Everyone should have a brochure in front of you that shows what these connections are. They're also on your screen, but it's really defining an urban trail that connects some of our major natural areas in the community, the Cuba Langford, the Bluffs nature area, Argo, the river, connects some of our major in-town neighborhoods, Old West Side, Water Hill, the Old Fourth Ward, the downtown core, including Carytown, going down south to the Ross Athletic Campus, to all the stadiums and athletics events in that area. So the purpose is to find a route that makes those connections and provides lots of opportunities to bring people into the trail from where they are or where they want to go. So some of the key issues and considerations, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I really want to focus special attention tonight on this feasible connection, needing to look at something that could actually happen in the future. So while this is going to be a master plan level of detail, so a conceptual level of detail, and the intent is to have this adopted as an element of the city's master plan, there will be a lot of work beyond this point, but we've developed a lot of relationships and talked to property owners along the entire length of this project and done some very intense analysis to get where we are. So we feel fairly confident that what you see tonight is actually a feasible plan that could move into the next stage after master plan adoption. The master plan itself will hit upon about 10 of the city's 16 sustainability framework goals. And while we'll be talking a lot about the alignment tonight, we really want to emphasize the importance of the sustainability framework goals as it relates to this plan, providing non-motorized opportunities to reduce greenhouse gases, using sustainable materials throughout the construction of this, working within the policies of the Green Streets policy, looking for stormwater management opportunities wherever possible, and looking for opportunities for native plants and bringing in pollinators to the region through the heart of downtown. The project is now in task 4, so as I said, this has been about an 18-month to 2-year process, and we are now in the master plan documentation phase. We have a draft plan that was in your packet that has been sent out to adjoining jurisdictions for their review, and our next step then will take it to Planning Commission and City Council for their action on potential adoption. You can see in the right column there that our engagement structure, we met with a lot of people through this process, and not only a citizen advisory committee who guided the effort, but we also pulled in people throughout city staff, across all units, and from the county as technical advisory committee members so that they can bring their unique perspective to bear on this project. We met with lots of public members through stakeholder focus meetings and through community-wide meetings. With that brief introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Oliver Kiley, who will talk about the framework plan itself.
Thanks, Connie. Just that gently. Okay. So just a couple of high-level things here. As Connie mentioned early on, this went through kind of a rebranding and renaming from Greenway to an urban trail, and I think it is an important shift. The charge for this process, as Connie mentioned, was really about that non-motorized connection, and yet, as this has been discussed in the community for decades, we also don't want to lose sight of some of those other opportunities along the way for expanding habitat, expanding green space, and those kinds of things. So I'll touch on that a little bit as we go through. But the important thing to recognize is that as an urban trail, it is a very messy urban environment that it's going through. There's lots of streets, lots of utilities, lots of different property owners, buildings, infrastructure, all that we have to get around. And trying to create something that's big and has from a design standpoint, meets all the needs and functions that we want for it, it's complicated to fit all of that into the urban environment. That said, something that we really felt strongly about this is that this be a facility that's really designed for all ages, all abilities, and all modes of non-motorized travel. So whether that's running, walking, biking, pogo sticking, whatever it may be, we want it to be something that's accessible to people and that really provides enough width and enough amenity that it can be usable by a broad range of users. In general, really coming out of our meetings with the community was a very strong preference for an off-street alignment. So the community and our stakeholder group really recognize that they don't want this to be just a series of bike lanes that we put a sign up that says, okay, here's the greenway, here's the trail. It needs to be something more than that. And in general, trying to have something that can provide a more continuous route that avoids some of the really major road crossings that pose safety concerns and provides a more continuous experience for people is very important. And so we get asked a lot of questions throughout the process. The slides, I'm not going to read through all of these, but what's going to be included in the trail itself? Is it just pavement? Is it just a sidewalk? No, there's lots of other things that we've assumed will be part of the design. We're not down to that nuts and bolts level yet. This is still a master plan, so it's still fairly high level, but our cost analysis and our assumptions about what would go into the design reflects the things that you see here. So pavement, pedestrian scale lighting, landscaping, which can include native plantings. Connie mentioned the stormwater management piece, so the design assumes stormwater management throughout the whole way that would at least meet the Green Streets policy for managing all the runoff that's being generated, and certainly there will be opportunities throughout for capturing adjacent stormwater and being able to manage that along the corridor as well. That said, it's important to note that this is not a floodplain management project, or it's not intended to perform flood control duties. There may be opportunities as implementation moves forward for those kinds of projects to be paired up with this. And we're already seeing some of that, like the berm project that goes underneath the MDOT rail berm. You're probably aware of that project. That was designed as a flood relief project first and foremost, but now it has a trail component that's part of the tree line those two things are being integrated. So we've been working with a lot of the city staff, Jerry Hancock and others from a water management standpoint so that we can continue to track those opportunities for kind of mutual benefit as we move forward. So a little bit about the design of the trail itself. The general assumption is that we're trying to have the trail fall within a 30-foot wide corridor. Up to 20 feet of that might be paved with a separation of uses between bicycle and pedestrian traffic. This is a similar cross-section if you've been on the DeQuinder Cut in Detroit. That's a 20-foot wide paved space. And then the extra 10 feet that we have would be on either side of the trail for landscaping, amenities, lighting. There could be bioswales or other kinds of landscape treatments for managing stormwater. And then something as implementation moves forward, wherever there's opportunities to expand that, and we can negotiate getting a bigger easement or more property or all of a piece of property, we certainly want to look for those opportunities to create more green space or more natural area along the corridor. So that's that kind of expansion zone that's identified on the right there. Just a quick note, we've had a lot of questions about, why aren't we just going right down the railroad corridor? That's many of the visions that have been looked at in the past have put the trail right down the rail corridor. Just a couple things to note about that. For the most part, the rail corridor is about 50 feet wide, and the tracks are right in the middle of it. And you have to have at least 9 feet on either side of the center of the tracks clear for trains and all that kind of stuff. So that only leaves you with 16 feet on one side of your path, or on one side of the tracks in which to put a trail. You need to have at least 2 feet on either side of the trail clear, so now we're down to a 12-foot wide pavement with basically no other room for amenities in there. So for the most part, a trail of the level that we envision here just isn't going to fit in the rail right away. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see as we go through this, there's much more of a use and emphasis on public and private property that we can route this through. We also looked at, there are some on-street sections, and the general approach for that would be to create, a separated bicycle facility along with wider sidewalks and then landscaping treatments along the street, which could include things like bioswales on one or both sides of the road. The assumption is that for the on-street sections, generally parking would have to be removed from at least one side of the road if there's parking present. And in some of the narrower areas, it may have to be removed on both sides of the road, but we'll talk about those sections as we go. And then lastly, just to note, you'll see as we go through the framework, there's a lot of elevated sections that lead up to some of the bridges that bridge over some of the major roadways. These elevated ramped sections are designed to meet ADA requirements. We designed them around a 7% slope, which is enough to accommodate, ramps and things like that, and flat spaces. Again, that's more of an engineering detail, what that works out to be at the end of the day. But the idea is wherever we have an elevated ramp that's leading up to a bridge, that there be a connector walkway within that 30-foot wide corridor that would tie back to the street sidewalk. So those start to all double as access points onto the trail at each of those bridge locations. So the framework itself, which you'll see on the next series of pages, the big fat lines have different coloring relating to the kind of property and the type of trail that they are. And the framework also identifies a number of near-term opportunities and thinner lines. And so this may be, as this project will need to be phased over time, there may be improvements to streets or temporary kind of near-term opportunities for making connections while we wait for some of the main sections to be built. The other thing that the framework identifies throughout are, opportunities and identifying parcels that are impacted, and those could all be opportunities, again, for more habitat or natural area or stormwater management along the corridor. So in addition, and so we're kind of going to zoom in on this map a little bit, and we'll walk through it fairly briefly. We can always go back if there's questions. But really, there are 5 key things kind of driving this alignment in this framework. As Connie mentioned, feasibility was the #1 one. So we met with many property owners throughout this process. Almost every property owner, except for a few that we weren't able to get in touch with. And we asked them, are you willing to, or comfortable having this trail alignment show up in the city master plan on your property? And everybody that we spoke to that's impacted by this alignment has said, yes, we're comfortable with that. So in some cases, we met with property owners and they said, nope, I don't want anything going through my property, at least not now. And so the alignment was adjusted to reflect that. And then certainly from an engineering standpoint, we've looked at that in quite a bit of detail to make sure it could work. But then the other factors, again, kind of relate back to that goal and the experience side of it. So having a continuous trail connection, I'm emphasizing the user experience and safety, making sure that we are connecting to those destinations and assets. And there's lots of kind of smaller connector walkways or smaller connections off of the main trail to make sure that we're making those connections as well. And then thinking about, what are those unique opportunities or moments that can be created along this. This is certainly a significant investment, so we don't want to lose opportunities to have a big lasting impact on the community. So we'll kind of move from north to south in this. I'll get to where the purple line is on the next slide, but I just want to mention, so this is just the south end of Argo Pond, right by where the Argo Dam is and the border-to-border trail. You can see where the train tracks go across the river. One of the kind of near-term, or not a near-term, but one of the alternative opportunities that we've identified during this process was the opportunity to bring a bigger trail through Bluffs Nature Area with a possible bridge over North Main and over the MDOT rail tracks down into Bandimere. That's kind of a back pocket option that we're keeping. It's not the primary alignment, but we've met with natural area preservation staff and with some of the mountain biking groups in there to talk about how that would work and how to strike the right balance of uses. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as could be a complement or an alternative to our primary alignment that we're suggesting. I'm going to shift to the next one though. So what you can see coming up from the bottom of the screen, that purple line, and then the black dashed line, that's where that trail tunnel connection is underneath the MDOT rail line. That would then cross onto the DTE property, which is the red line, and connect over to the existing border-to-border trail. And then from there, we're proposing some sort of ramp structure. It could be a spiral ramp. That's one design option that would bring people about 25 feet in the air and get enough clearance to get over the MDOT rail line and cross over North Main Street all the way to Wilt and Sunset. And then the main alignment for the trail would follow partly within the rail corridor and partly within the street right away, down Wilt, across Summit Street and into 721 North Main. Shift down. So 721 North Main, that's city-owned property. There's been a lot of different design proposals in the past for that. Many of them have looked at creating stormwater storage areas or other natural spaces on that. So that's certainly a spot where, this trail alignment doesn't preclude any of those things from happening. And so that project can move forward kind of in parallel as a coordinating opportunity with the trail. But the trail itself would go along the west edge of 721, go through and follow along a vacated railroad spur that goes down to grade at Felch. We would cross Felch Street, the Kingsley condominium development. We have a 30-foot easement that was secured as part of the site plan review process for the trail. So that would bring you through to Kingsley. There's a short little section on street, and then it would go through private property, and then the dashed line is where it goes back into a ramped situation. So we're ramping up and bridging over Miller Street. The reason for that is Miller comes down the hill. There's a railroad track. The visibility is bad. There's a bend in the road as well. So there's a lot of traffic through there, so that was a key crossing point. From there, the main alignment will actually go underneath, tunnel through the elevated rail, or where the railroad is bermed up, and there would be a connection through a private property to West Park. So that provides kind of a nice trail linkage that reaches much further west into the neighborhoods. The main alignment, though, would continue through private property, bridge, ramp up and bridge over Huron, and then roughly follow at the elevation of the railroad tracks where it goes south over Huron, over Washington, and then it would come back to grade as the railroad tracks come back to grade at Liberty. So that would bring it through 415 West Washington, which is another city-owned property. And then we're proposing kind of a major gateway location at First and Liberty. The trail would be on street for a section along First, and then once it crosses William, would parallel the railroad tracks through private property, come back out onto the street for about a half-block section along Ashley, and then cross Ashley with the new series of mid-block improvements, and then using private property would ramp back up with a bridge over Main Street, South Main, and Madison. And as part of the 615 South Main Street development that's underway right now, there's a 15-foot easement that was secured as part of for potential trail use as part of that project, so we're utilizing that. And then the trail would ramp back down through the back of that property and come to grade at Mosley, and would be on street, would then come back out onto the street at Hill Street, just east-west of Elbell Field. And so it would then, we'd have crossing improvements at Green and Hill. We would go down Green Street to Hoover, improve that intersection, then go east on Hoover, all the way down to State Street, and then from State Street south down to Stimson. And that would all be on-road improvements and an on-street sections through there. So just a few more illustrative images showing what some of these kind of key locations might look like. So again, north is to the right, so I'll just jump into what these are. So this was one design thought for the spiral ramp that would be just north of where the existing railroad crossing is. There's lots of different ways that could be designed, but this could be something that doubles as, an overlook in the community. You'd be able to look up and down Argo Pond, look down the Huron River, get a view of the skyline. You could build in places where people could stand and fish off of it. So there's lots of different uses for that. And the idea is that the center of this ramp would actually be, a deck or some sort of large platform that people could actually use as a fun space overlooking the community. And then this was just a shot looking at the connection point at Summit and Wilt Street. So you can see where the railroad tracks kind of pass through that. And there'd be intersection improvements, improvements to the railroad signals, all that kind of thing. But we would cross through and then connect into 721 North Main, going off towards the left. Here was a shot, if you imagine yourself looking out of the YMCA upper floors, like where the track is, looking north. This is the bridge that's coming up over Huron Street, parallel to the railroad tracks. You can see in orange, just symbolically where that tunnel would be that connects through. And then back there going to the left on the screen would be that connection through a private parcel where we would be able to get an easement and connect into West Park. And then here was just a look at that Liberty Street gateway. Again, really thinking about on some of these intersections where the trail is coming through, really trying to make that as safe and kind of as possible. So there'd be a lot of intersection improvements to that to really slow down traffic, to really draw attention to where the trail is and where people are. And certainly there's other elements that could be designed within that space as well. And then a look at the bridge at South Main. So this is looking north. So the bridge kind of coming towards you, crossing over South Main Street and crossing over Madison. Okay, so a few slides on implementation. One of the partners that we've been working with throughout this process has been the Allen Creek Conservancy, now the Tree Line Conservancy. And we've been working with them, and their interest is in assembling a business plan that'll help advance the implementation of this forward. For almost without exception, many of the municipalities and communities that we've worked with building these urban trails, they tend to be managed and operated, and a lot of the capital costs are raised through conservancy organizations. So if you've been to the Riverwalk in Detroit or DeQuinter Cut in Detroit, the Riverfront Conservancy there is the group that's fundraised to build those projects. They run the maintenance, they run the management. And so the Tree Line Conservancy sees themselves playing that kind of role here and helping to build the tree line and also to manage it and operate it moving forward. So they're putting together a business plan that has three kind of key parts to it. One is the governance structure, so what are those legal agreements and those formal agreements and partnerships that need to be formed that give them authority to do this. Second is the financial plan, and it's not just raising money to build it, but it's raising money to have an endowment fund for maintenance and management or some other suite of financial tools to be able to support that long-term maintenance and management of the trail. So they're looking at a very broad range of funding. This is probably the most boring slide on the whole thing, but it's all the very important maintenance tasks that need to be addressed. I'm not going to go through those. And then the last piece that intersects a bit with the tree line master plan that we're putting together is that kind of phasing and implementation strategy. So which part of this do we build first? What are the important pieces to come online? And so I'll touch on that in the next couple of slides. One thing to mention too, that the Tree Line Conservancy has really taken the lead on the marketing and branding side of this, so trying to get people to be more aware of what this project is. One of the needs that they expressed early on was that there's a lot of confusion in the community between what the Allen Creek Greenway was versus the city's Greenbelt program, and so that was one of the reasons why they went through this exercise to make that shift, so that it was more clear in the community what we were talking about. A little bit on phasing, so we looked at breaking the project up into three big zones, north, central, and south zone, based largely, going the wrong way, based largely on the kinds of properties that we were going through. I'll zoom in on the north zone in a second, but I'll just make note here, the central zone, that's a lot of private properties to go through, individual private properties. The south zone is almost entirely within public street right-of-way, so that's something that's a little different about that one. And then the north zone is really a mix of city-owned properties, street rights-of-way, railroad property in some cases, and then property owners that we've talked to, with a few exceptions. And so one of the key things from a implementation standpoint is making that connection, as Connie said, directly to existing trail networks and trail systems, particularly as we go after funding for trail improvements. Being able to make a connection to the border-to-border trail is really important. Section B on there, that is currently moving forward. The city is in engineering and design phase for that as part of the flood management project there. That's the berm cut under the MDOT rail. And so we're suggesting that Section A, which creates that really critical linkage over North Main Street into the river, be the next piece that moves forward from an implementation standpoint. And then we can kind of work south from there. And we'll go through all those in detail. Okay, last, you probably have seen the cost numbers for this floating around. It is a significant expense. So about $55 million is the number that's been in some of the different articles. What that does include is, that includes all those assumptions about what would fit within that 30-foot wide corridor. Plus, I want to make note that our cost analysis includes, upwards of quite a few acres worth of restoration area. So there's line items in there for landscaping improvements, habitat restoration, stormwater management, all those kinds of things. Where exactly that will land in here, that's really going to be in our next phase as we move forward, figuring out where that is. But there's a hardy amount that's, we've assumed that those kinds of things will come along as implementation moves forward. The cost doesn't include, any other kind of direct acquisition costs for properties. Those are contingent on lots of unknowns at this point. There's other major utility work that the city needs done that would dovetail with this. It doesn't include those kinds of things. So you can see that list of what the cost does not include. And then in terms of kind of benchmarking relative to other peer projects, these are some of the case studies that we looked at for other significant urban trail projects. The 606 in Bloomingdale community, which is a Chicago neighborhood, very similar in terms of having a lot of elevated sections, a similar length. Chicago's a more expensive market and the cost per foot is higher, but we're kind of within the ballpark of what some of these other trail facilities cost, with the exception of the High Line, which costs way more. But people always asked us about it. They're like, is this going to be like the High Line? We're like, yeah, if you have $25,000 a lineal foot of trail to spend, sure. But we're not quite there yet. Okay. Oh,
That's okay. So our next steps are on next Wednesday in council chamber. We have our last community-wide meeting, and we'll be presenting what you saw tonight. And we'll have all sorts of displays set up. Tentatively, we have some dates for our approval process timeline. November 8th would be the Planning Commission public hearing for consideration of taking action on adoption, and then moving on to City Council December 18th. And so those dates are to be confirmed, but that's kind of where we're at. So by the end of the year, we hope to have an adopted plan, and then we will be looking at how to form a structure to continue to work with the Tree Line Conservancy to provide staff support, and as they develop their business plan in tandem with this approval process. So we welcome any questions or comments at this point. This is the end of the formal presentation.
Any questions?
For the ramp areas, do you have, just as somebody who walks and bikes a lot, sometimes I like the most direct route too, instead of the long, slow ramp up. Do you plan on having steps as well as ramps?
yeah, sure. That's something that we could certainly look at. You know, one of the drawings, the picture that showed the Huron Bridge street crossing, there was a set of steps there right off the sidewalk. You know, that whether that's a set of steps or a sidewalk that goes all the way back, you know, paralleling the ramp section. I think those are design details to work out. The cost estimate included, you know, some amount of steps and/or ramps or other sidewalk connections to make those linkages. So what exactly they are will depend.
But we did hear from the community that that direct route is really important and that continuity is really important. So that was what our intent was in designing this alignment, is making it a route that people are actually going to use because it is the most direct route to use.
Other questions? Commissioner Byrne?
So the only disappointing portion of the project to me is State Street Hoover, of course. And, I mean, State Street is a sort of major arterial road, and I would assume that the right-of-way we know about is the right-of-way, and it's not possible to widen. The railroad right-of-way through that section is also so narrow, or is there just permission issues that maybe might get adjusted down the road a ways?
So in order to get to the rail in those sections, we would have to go through university property. And the university has asked us not to show alignment through their property in the master plan. And we had looked at options of connecting through university property, but we always had those other on-street
Yeah.
routes on there as well. So we've met with both Watco. Watco is the holding company for Ann Arbor Railroad, who operates the railroad. It's a short line freight rail corridor. And we've had 3 meetings with Watco through this process. They are well aware that the sections that we're asking for through their property will show up in the master plan, and they're okay with that. They know that there's several next steps to work to get some sort of formal agreement with them. Whether we could actually use that section of the corridor without going through university property, that was the issue, so.
In any case, there's not a slam shut, totally locked door.
I would say not. You know, the plan is designed to be flexible, and so as other opportunities arise that might make this a better alignment over time, we're going to be seeking those
Right.
opportunities. So both with Watco and continued discussions with the University of Michigan, we intend on continuing to talk about this. This is the south end of the project. We anticipate starting on the north end. So we think there's time for property owners to see the benefit of this.
Very good. Thank you.
And one other, piggyback with one other thing too, because I had to sort of tell myself to, find the good in that switch too, and something about the Hoover and State Street corridor to think about as well is that, and that is a very heavily used corridor from a pedestrian standpoint. I actually drive past there almost every day when I take my kids to daycare. And so there's lots of people crossing that street and moving along it. And so if at the end of the day it did end up being, significant improvements along that corridor, improving mid-block crossings all along there, helping to regulate the flow of traffic, actually get some more green space incorporated into that, I don't think that would be a horrible thing at the end of the day. And the connections to the neighborhood and like the Lower Burns Park area is actually better in a way on there, because otherwise, if you're following the railroad tracks, you're pretty much landlocked. Once you get on there, there's no getting on or off through a lot of the U of M property. They'd keep that pretty secure and tightened down. So if you're looking for the silver lining on it, I think those are a couple things to keep in mind.
Commissioner Apple?
When the university was approached, was there any discussion about a narrower trail system there? Or were they only approached with the 30 to 50-foot option?
Good question. So the university, in fact, had 2 representatives on our Citizen Advisory Committee, and they participated every step along the way. And so we presented several different options. We did look at a somewhat narrower section. We looked at a completely elevated section through El Bell Field. That's where the marching band practices as well. And so in addition to those meetings at the Citizen Advisory Committee, Oliver and I would go into their offices and show them other options. So we talked about some narrower cross sections as well. In the end, they did not want to see anything on their property, and so they asked us to remove it.
Could you just summarize what their concerns were?
Probably the best way to describe it is they felt that the inclusion of a trail on their property did not complement the uses on those properties. So when we say property, we looked at the El Bell Field, running through the El Bell Field along the parking lot near the stadium, and they were concerned about losing parking spaces. And through the golf course down near Stimson, as it runs along the fence line, and they were concerned about disturbing play. It wasn't disturbing play, but there are some trees along that fence line that they felt would be disturbed. I will say that in meeting with Watco, and this is connected, in meeting with the railroad company, their primary concern is safety and liability. And so they're not happy about all the people who walk illegally down the railroad tracks during game days of all kinds. And so they really liked the alignment that paralleled the railroad track that sort of solved the problem of the direction that people want to walk in and will continue to walk in. So while there is a silver lining to the on-street, it doesn't solve the problem of people walking along the railroad corridors. So, did that answer your question?
Any other questions? Thank you so much. That was
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I move
Thank
the
you for your
resolution as
time.
presented.
Let's just get right to it. Is there a
Why
second?
not?
All right. Let's see.
Do you want me to read the resolve clauses? So for the benefit of the public watching on TV, resolved, the Environmental Commission supports the Tree Line Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan, and resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that the City Planning Commission and City Council initiate the process to adopt the Tree Line Allen Creek Urban Trail Master Plan as an element of the city master plan.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. It's really exciting, really nice work, you guys. Thanks very much. tell us about it.
I can't wait for it to be built.
I know. Next on our agenda, I want to hop to the memo that I sent to you on September 13th that the city administrator had sent to me about an update on the solid waste and recycling program areas. I'd like to bring this up for discussion, and there are a few things that I would like to introduce, and then I'd like to hear other people's perspectives as well. First, the memo begins with MRF repairs. There was a fire, and the source is still unknown, and there was a steel wall that has been damaged, and it was moved off of its supports, which has prevented any work that is against that wall from happening. So material has accumulated and raised additional fire concerns, which has caused the city administrator to ask for emergency repairs and to suspend all work at the MRF. That's one problem. The second one is that the conveyor system that feeds the baler wasn't working, and the city needed to determine if they needed to repair the conveyor system or replace it, and what the cost would be. And then because the baler was rendered inoperable because of the conveyor system, which would have been the way that they separated commercial recycling from other recycling, everything has been loose-loaded, which has meant that the city cannot get the revenue that they would normally get for commercial recycling, so the revenue has dipped. So all of these things are obviously not ideal, and the memo details that. It also delineates the myriad of agreements that the city has entered into to provide collection and compost and recycling services. And as the memo indicates, it makes it difficult for customers to figure out who's providing these services. And it's obviously an extremely inefficient process for the city to have to bid out and negotiate several contracts, and it makes it difficult to improve services and hire and keep workers. All of that makes sense to me. But I have some questions about the second part in particular, which is, it seems like the city is moving to a direction of consolidating these services, which makes sense in an efficiency question, and it seems like there are companies such as Waste Management that would be able to provide all of these services. My concern is that I don't know how the education portion is going to be addressed. And one of the things that I think Recycle Ann Arbor does really well is they have a good education program. I don't think the city has a great track record of education programs. And I would like to ask the city staff for feedback on how they would address education, if that is in fact the direction that they're going. And I'd also just like to open up this memo for discussion to see if other people have questions or concerns that we could formally submit to ask for responses. Did you get any additional information, Jason or Chip, from anybody since we've gotten this?
We authorized some emergency funding
Okay.
to fix a number of things. I don't know the time frame of that implementation or the evaluation.
And that was the wall and the conveyor, or?
Actually, there were three items. What was the third? Do you remember?
The big one was the wall.
Okay,
One was removal of all the
Removal.
waste.
That was the third.
okay.
Yeah, but I have not checked in to see what the status of that is.
And do you know if they've determined, if they've looked into the conveyor? Do they have an idea about?
Nobody shared anything with us yet. I mean, we just authorized that 10 days ago, so.
So what was authorized about around that conveyor?
I'd have to pull up the, I don't, you have your,
I'll look it up while we're talking.
Okay.
I don't remember if it was, what the level of the contract was.
I generally have concerns that the MRF seems to be falling by the wayside, and that not enough is being done as far as planning to get it back up and running to some degree. Losing that conveyor, I've heard, is costing us $30,000 a month.
additional because of the loss of revenue and the way that everything has to be hauled to Ohio, which that number suspiciously isn't in this memo. And so I think that in general, looking at the long-term strategy of making a regional MRF is probably a good idea, but it's probably a 5 or 10-year period to get there, and we need a short-term plan to get back up and doing what the people of Ann Arbor want to do, which is recycle a maximum amount of materials at the best cost. And in the interim, trying to align some of these contracts so that when they go to a regional facility, that they can align them with other communities so that they can box them together, I think is going to be a good thing. I'm not sure about putting everything under one contract. It makes it easier for staff. I'm not sure how much of a real problem there is right now as far as, I could see maybe having the recycling pickup work with actually doing all the recycling and running MRF. I can see what goes to the landfill gets picked up by the company that either has a landfill or deals with trucking to a landfill. Those streams are relatively separate. So not entirely sure that you need to bundle them all together. You may lose something because not everybody is the best at doing all three things necessarily. And so you may end up with more of a direction towards landfill and a little less for recycling or some other issues with that. So I'm just not entirely sure that that's as big a problem as it seems. Does the public complain about not knowing who's picking things up? I don't know.
I actually think that they do. I mean, I've had to call sometimes to figure out, who's picking up whatever, and the people who answer the phone in the city, because there are so many different service providers, reasonably don't always know who they need to contact, and I understand that. And I actually can see the benefit of consolidating all of these things, but I share the concern that if it is all consolidated and provided by one organization, that we would lose something. But, I remember the amount of energy that we expended just for the interim contract for the recycling. I mean, if we go through that sort of gesture every time we have to renegotiate and issue an RFP and collect them, I mean, that's an extremely energy-intensive and inefficient process, and we wind up, wasting money while we're trying to get something better in place. And I definitely see that this is a broken system. But
I'm not sure that it was always the case that it was that much of a problem. It certainly was recently, and there may be some other factors involved that caused that to be such a problem. So you might want to look elsewhere for a solution. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough.
A few things. So
Yeah.
I apologize, I got one of those wrong. One of the emergency purchase orders was for the removal. One was to fix the push wall, and one was an emergency purchase order with Western Washtenaw Recycling to ship some of our recycling. So the analysis is, we didn't see, it's
Okay.
just through staff at this point.
Got it.
While I do completely agree that the system is broken, and the process is not only overly energy intensive, it puts us behind the 8 ball on a routine basis, especially in recent years. My take on that has been that that's been primarily because, as we've all talked about over and over again, we don't have the right staff person in the right position to manage this situation. Upper level management who are doing that work, they're tasked with too many things. This is too micromanaging for them. And the vacant position that we approved, that council approved, is currently being effectively that funding is being used within the process of evaluating the possibility of a regional authority, which is also a really necessary component, and it doesn't get away from the concerns, but that's how I see that landscape looking right now. The other component that I'd like to address that you bring up. While we could presume that the memo showcases an idea that that consolidating services may be of value to the city, and that might solve some of the problems that I just noted and that you also noted, that also brings up concerns for me. I think presuming that as intent is probably distinctly premature at this point, at least from my perspective. I'd love to talk to more people about that and hear more. But I think that the upper level management is in earnest and honestly looking into a regional authority for recycling, which states that the presumption is maybe not necessarily uniquely true. Yeah, that's just a few replies there.
No, I appreciate that.
Just a concern about the regional recycling. It sounds great, but we have a region where some people, some cities have, like Ann Arbor, a pretty robust recycling history, and we have communities that don't. And so I don't know how that kind of works together. But as I expressed a couple meetings ago, I'm not comfortable with Ann Arbor always holding the money bag to help other communities who are not. To me, you do the things that are important to you and you put your money where your priorities are. And if some of your priorities are not to get curbside recycling, I don't know that we solve it. So I think that there's areas for cooperation and certainly in the processing of the recycling, but some of the other things were kind of troublesome as a taxpayer to me.
Yeah. So the process that predominantly the county, the Washington, Water Resource Commissioner's office is going through at this point is sort of the dipping the toes in that to evaluate where all the local sort of near jurisdictions are, what their interest would be, what that would look like, to start to evaluate what that might look like for any or all of us.
You know, because after the meeting 2 months ago when the presentation was made and they said, oh, you know, Ann Arbor could get some credits because they do their curbside recycling. I'm thinking, credits? Why would we pay for non-curbside recycling if we already pay for curbside recycling? And especially because dollars are not inexhaustible. You know, I want to see Ann Arbor. To me, if we're serious already about recycling, I want to move to the next level and be more serious about composting and having it year-round and moving forward. I'm not sure that some of those plans made as much sense to me.
I would be surprised if we got to the point that we were subsidizing out-county pickup and collection. That's, you know, I look at this almost the same way I look at police services. And, you know, Ann Arbor already pays for our own police services. Why would our taxpayers want to subsidize road patrols for Lodi Township? We don't. And so I think that at least my understanding of how we're moving forward on this is really looking at it more as a collection and a processing facility than it is how do we build a broader collection network outside of the borders of Ann Arbor. That's not our interest in this. It's how do we get enough volume of materials, and how do we share the cost in building and operating a facility. I mean, I think what the last year and a half has shown us is that the MRF is broken, and I don't know that it's fixable. It sure doesn't seem like it is. And we can keep throwing good money after bad in trying to patch it together, but at a certain point, it just doesn't work anymore. And I think we're very desperately trying to figure out the most cost-effective solution to provide the level of service that we expect that allow us to look at, you know, expanding our compost and doing those sorts of things. Because I think when I talk to people in the community, that's what I hear. It's like, we need to do this stuff. And, you know, what's happening at the MRF is imperiling our ability to do that, both from a financial and a manpower standpoint.
I just would like to see a bit more of an entrepreneurial approach. Maybe it's being taken that way, I don't know, but it seems to me if we build a good facility that has more capacity than we need, and they will come. and we need to charge accordingly and get the thing up and running. I agree with you, Chip. It's spilled milk now, but the city was quite remiss in managing its capital investment at the MRF. It just got crashed, basically, and the most recent events out there sort of confirm that. Governments are kind of afraid to be entrepreneurial in most instances, but I think there's an economic opportunity with facilities such as this, and I would hope that the planning going forward screws up some courage and says, hey, you know, we're going to build this thing. We can simultaneously start the planning for a good facility wherever it's going to be on our property and get our own thing up and going. And as the evolution of other communities' interests and the university's interests, and they can be developed, we can build them in as the planning process goes forward. No doubt it won't work out perfectly, but the time that it will take to go from where we are to recycling in this community again with our own facility is just awfully long if we don't get fired up to do it.
Well, I guess, you know, part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this tonight is, you know, I understand that these things that came up with the MRF were not things that anybody anticipated, and that these were emergency measures that needed to be taken, and that all makes sense to me. And I also know that the solid waste plan expires in 2017, and I know that there's interest somehow, somebody doing it. I've heard that maybe it will be contracted out. Actually, I think that's the only thing I've heard, but I don't know. As far as I know, the RFP hasn't gone out. I don't think anyone's been hired. And it just seems like there are so many pieces of this that just continue to roll into disaster that I wonder if there's just, what I'm trying to drive us to is at what point can we engage with this process so that we're not responding to things, so that we're more proactive, that we can be part of the planning process. I don't know that education necessarily has to be provided by Recycle Ann Arbor, but it has to be provided by someone. And all of these pieces, I don't feel like they're being taken into consideration, partly because this is such an unwieldy problem and it just keeps sprouting new leaks that need to be plugged up. But I would be interested in us finding a way that is not part of the resource management team, that's part of the Community Climate Partnership, but us as the Environmental Commission, figuring out a way to engage with the city staff to make some useful, practical recommendations. And I feel like a lot of the information I hear is hearsay, and I would like to know who is giving me this information, or who's providing it, and like what is actually going on.
Far be it from me to suggest another subcommittee.
I'm going there, I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's the most direct way for us to engage with city staff on this. And if it's a small subcommittee doing it, then they can bring information back to us, and we can schedule our work sessions to come up with, and I do think for us, we need to help the city figure out what that mid-range plan is that gets us to that new facility.
Agreed.
And I think that some of that is information sharing, but some of that's bringing some ideas to the table.
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm harshing on staff, because I don't mean to, but I think we're pretty out of ideas. And I think that for this body to be able to come in and offer a little expertise, you know, we're not so close to it. Maybe that's actually helpful.
Well, the way that it seems to be that we have made progress in the past is in collaboration with staff. So if we did make such a committee, can we ask staff to be part of it? Is that within our purview?
You can make a recommendation to city council that, you know, you can have a resolution to create the committee.
Okay.
And then a recommendation to city council that they direct the city administrator to provide staff support. You know, this would be staff other than me, I assume, because it'd be the staff working on these issues. That strikes me as certainly within the purview of the commission.
Is there interest in doing this on the commission? I'm interested. So I will, I guess, send out an email to all of us if you're interested in participating. Maybe get back to me and we'll put together a resolution for our next meeting and see if we can get this started. You know, I know it's frustrating for all of us, and I know it's frustrating for staff too. But at some point, we just have to start steering this. So,
I would also, I believe that Mr. Mirsky is also, through his other position, working directly with the city administrator. This is part of his interest set also, not just about the MRF, but about procedures.
sure, yep. Okay, well,
Can I follow up on one thing
Yes.
Commissioner Frenzel mentioned about the funding that had been approved? It sounds like there wasn't funding approved for fixing the conveyor.
Correct.
For the baler. How is that going to affect the contract with Recycle Ann Arbor? Aren't they building in to their,
yeah.
like, that's how they break even, that's how they're making money on this? Like, what, is there any other information on that? Like, when that might be fixed, how we can we do anything there?
I do not know.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No, absolutely. But you are correct. Just a point of clarification from earlier statements. Most of our recycling is being loose loaded and hauled into Ohio. Recycle Ann Arbor had negotiated at the last moment to have have cardboard, which is separated by a lot of businesses for us and delivered in bulk as just cardboard. That was being baled and brought to Detroit at a higher market value because it's cardboard and because it was single stream. That loss of revenue, if you will, and the percentage of wastage in the stream are both metrics as part of Recycle Ann Arbor's contract, and both come into highly likely potential conflict in this situation without the equipment available that was part of their original contract. But the contract is now, on both sides, portion of the contract are no longer viable. We haven't gotten anywhere past that. We're trying to fix the situation before looking into what we deal with, how we deal with that contract. And, agreed.
Do you have any sense of the timeline with the conveyor?
0. Sorry.
Is there any way to put some urgency behind that? Because it seems like a source of,
I got the impression there was urgency behind it. You know, I think that the situation isn't making anybody happy.
sure. great.
I just, neither Councilmember Frenzel nor I have been given any additional information. We can certainly follow up with staff to find out what that timeline is.
I guess, following up on the urgency that I felt on the day of the fire, all of council received multiple correspondence from the city administrator as soon as the situation was slightly stabilized and as soon as they had an understanding of what happened, not why, but that it happened, and then quickly came out with those additional asks for funding. Like, that was all within just a few days. And again, that was a week and a half ago.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so in the immediacy of last week, I felt pretty comfortable with their pressure on the system, but now it's been long enough that maybe we should inquire again.
Okay. Anything else about this from anyone? Right. Let's see. Next.
Thank you, Chairwoman, for bringing it up.
Well, you're welcome. I will keep bringing this up. Next, we have a report from committees and chairs. I'm going to keep talking, and I'm going to take us back to the metrics conversation we had during our last meeting. We had reviewed a document that a committee, a joint committee from the Energy Commission and the Environmental Commission had worked on evaluating the metrics that the city was using in the sustainability framework. Did we send out that?
this little,
Oh, yeah, here it is. I recorded thank you, the goals that we had determined on this committee fell within the Environmental Commission's purview. Sustainable systems, transportation options, integrated land use, local food, clean air and water, healthy ecosystems, responsible resource use. And as you remember, the Excel sheet that I sent out, we had looked about whether or not the indicators that we were following were good indicators to use to measure our progress on it, whether we needed to revisit them. What I would like us to do as a commission is to choose one or two of these that we are going to say is our priority, and to determine what metric and cadence that we think we need to implement in order to monitor its progress. I know we can't really talk about this right now, and the document is so big that it's really difficult to refer to. But I would like to bring this up again and to put this on our agenda and to ask us to be ready to talk about this in October. Any questions, comments?
Just, do we know if other commissions are looking at, have they selected metrics? I'm just thinking about prioritizing, if we're keeping tabs on metrics that other commissions might be also keeping tabs on. Is there a way to prioritize, to think about prioritizing there?
Well, Wayne could talk about the Energy Commission. I know that we had, as our joint commissions, we had talked about it. I don't believe planning is talking about this, at least not in the way that we're talking about it.
I would say that the transportation options, I mean, that's always part of our conversation.
Okay.
So that may be one that has some
Mhm.
overlap on it. So I think that's an important point that you bring up.
Yep.
You know, all of our time is limited, so let's figure out how we can be strategic and not lose sight of these things, because sometimes you get some synergy going on between different commissions because of their different perspectives, but maybe it's not the primary focus. At the same time, we need to make sure that we're not letting things slide through the cracks too, like, oh, well, that's, somebody else is taking care of that, right? You know, so I think what makes sense in some ways is to, for me to take this back to Planning Commission and just to kind of reassert, because we have a pretty full agenda, and I know transportation is part of that agenda, but to have them look at these things and see if there are some of these that we're taking on in a bigger way, or how we might be efficient about how we're looking at them from different perspectives, so I'm happy to do that.
You know, again, the intention behind reevaluating these metrics is so that we have a universal metric that we can use to actually monitor our progress, and not that we would mandate what other commissions should be doing, or that we would not necessarily work in tandem, but that the city, because we've adopted so many plans, it's really difficult to tell what kind of progress we're making. So it is my hope that we would all be looking at these as a way to monitor what kind of work we're doing, what we need to do, what needs more attention. So I think this definitely needs to happen across commissions. And hopefully, if we prioritize and we say these are the things that we're prioritizing, then we can use that as a standard and reach out to other commissions, say, here's how we're doing this. Join us in this, and eventually we will get to all of these areas. Are there reports from other committees?
The Energy Commission passed a resolution supporting the use of the millage funds as was worked on by a bunch of us, and it has since been passed by council, and that's a good thing. And we also passed a resolution supporting that the city's government's usage of energy be moved to 100% renewables as it becomes expedient.
Just to circle back to the millage funding, this did not come before our commission because the city council passed it before we met again. So I had written some support. I know other people had reached out and expressed their support, but as a commission, the timing didn't work for us to be able to do that. Or we would have also looked at it. Yes?
I would say for Planning Commission, we approved a couple of projects, one down on Broadway and one on Glen, that both are brownfields that are going to be dealing you know, with the waste because of the development. So that definitely is something we're doing. So the one on Glen there were some sticking points, and so may not fly through immediately. So anyway, that's.
It's 10 years ago. when we
Yes,
first started.
it's a long time ago, yeah. And they have to dig down 40 feet to be able to get to near the bottom of where the contamination is.
Gas station,
Yep.
gasoline.
Mhm.
But I don't think that's officially a brownfield project with a plan unless, I think they're cleaning it up.
Right. They're
But-
not using any outside funding for it.
Right, they're not
They
getting.
are doing it themselves.
Right.
But the net, you know, at the
There
end
is
of the
that
day, there's cleaning going on.
benefit, absolutely.
Exactly, that's right.
Yeah, in Broadway Village, there is a brownfield
Yes.
plan.
Right.
Yeah, and on that one, just to be clear, there's more and more interest in this volatilization to indoor air, especially with dry cleaners. And we know that material has moved off-site, and so there's a real concern that we knock it down before it leaves the site, because potentially those other properties between that eastern edge and the river do not have barriers and things like that built in that some of the newer construction does. So, you know, I think we all agree that there's a good opportunity there, and I think the state is actually spending a couple $100,000 of their own money trying to evaluate what the best remediation strategy is there. And so there's, I think we've got, it's a couple $1 million built into that easy just for the remediation strategy. We're just not sure what it is yet.
Mhm. I believe there was a dry cleaner on the Glen site, too.
Really?
I think so. That,
I think you're right.
That hasn't been there for a while, but I'm pretty sure that was part of the package there.
Pretty sure the article in the paper said that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Might have been on Catherine or Ann, not on Glenn.
Could have been, because
the
they're
pizza
going,
places,
they're going
yeah.
to, you know, end to
Yeah.
end, so.
Anything from Parks?
Fuller Park Pool was open for 2 extra weeks. If you happen to get down there, the last weekend it was open, it was wonderful. And you can, looks like you didn't know that. Yes, it was open till the middle of September, as a result of park user surveys who requested that at least one of the pools be open for a longer period of time. They had to do some significant juggling of staff to be able to make sure that all of the lifeguards ended up at that pool, but very popular and very nice to be in Fuller Pool in 88-degree weather in the middle of September. Also, at our last...
Thank you for that. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback at council on that.
Good.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Also, being there on a Sunday when sports leagues are playing gives you an understanding of the need for all of the parking at Fuller Park on both sides of the street. When the pool's engaged, when there are teams on all the fields, there are a lot of cars there. Which segues nicely into the other thing that we were presented. Eli Cooper came to
Transportation.
present the new train station plan per the federal process that deemed the Fuller Road site the best option for moving forward.
So 2 questions. One, does the border-to-border trail get fitted into that plan?
What we, members of the Parks Commission did give some good feedback in terms of potential for trail alignments, non-motorized transportation alignments. They were less present in this particular presentation. We saw how the train fits into the university, how the station fits over the tracks, where the parking structure would be built to be able to do this. We saw a little less detail in terms of how non-motorized would tie in, or how other parking or buses tie into this as well. But this was it was still at a rather high level planning. We weren't seeing plans for construction.
The east part of the Gallup Park Trail was supposed to be repaved because of an asphalt quality deficiency, is that done?
Oh, that was done.
Great.
But the sign
That
is
was-
still up.
So everyone should know the trail up to Mathai Gardens is open. So those who ride the trail between the new train station site going east can go all the way now up to Mathai.
Are there any other updates from council? You could say no.
I mean, outside of our use resolution for millage funds, I think everybody's aware of the public safety and mental health millage that's on the ballot this fall from Washtenaw County Council. In August, we passed a use resolution breaking down part of the millage, provides a rebate to all of the jurisdictions that have their own police departments. We, as council, thought it was important for us to tell voters how we would intend to use that funding. And it is, breaks down 40% climate change programs, 40% affordable housing, and 20% pedestrian and bicycle safety programs. So that's an important part of this dialogue to have when we're talking about this out in the community. One of the things that we have talked about excessively here is the fact that we don't have any money to do any real climate change program. You know, this millage, if this passes, you know, will provide us with real, stable, and solid funding for a period of time. And I think that that is a very valuable discussion to have out in the community.
And does everybody know how that resolution got passed? What our recommendation that Mayor Taylor and Commissioner Frenzel and Commissioner Smith brought forward that would support solar and, I'm just now blanking on it, solar.
An energy efficient,
Right,
energy
energy
smart
efficient,
program.
Yep,
EV charging
right,
Grants?
grants.
yep. Well, that was not part of it, because that
Right,
was in
sorry,
the
No.
budget.
that's right.
It was basically moving it out into the community.
Yep.
Um,
So they're community-facing programs. All good news? Can we have a report from staff?
Sure. So I'm going to do one thing first, which is share a environmentally preferred procurement. And this is one of our APRs, Administrative Policies and Procedures. The administrator was interested in making sure we're doing more on environmentally preferable purchasing. There's a lot that gets done by the city staff on their own, but this was a way to codify it, and so it directs employees to be mindful of this and take active steps to do their best. This is kind of a messy thing in cities. Some big cities have 4 full-time staff that are, you know, available to help other parts of the city, whereas we have 1 full-time procurement person. So we don't really have the infrastructure to support, you know, somebody who's can do all that background research for staff. But, you know, we have park staff. Amy looks for environmentally preferable products. So what this does is basically put the onus on the service areas to do the homework on when they're going out for procurement. And I'll point you to a couple places. On the page 4 of 7, if you look at procedures, we're going to start putting an environmental commitment statement in our procurement documents. So this one's, the City of Ann Arbor recognizes its responsibility to minimize negative impacts on human health and the environment while supporting a vibrant community and economy. Further recognizes that products and services the city buys have inherent environmental and economic impacts. But the key line is the city encourages potential vendors to bring forward emerging and progressive products and services that they offer, which are most suited to the city's environmental principles. And so we're actually asking vendors to bring, if we didn't ask for it the right way, and you think there's a better way for us to do it, come and tell us. And then there's a requirement that if someone comes to us with an alternate, kind of more environmentally preferred way to do something, a product, staff is responsible for providing a written justification of why they didn't take that offer. So this starts to just put more of an onus and a formal, this is a employee policy. Failure to follow it could have repercussions. So this is something the administrator can do on his own. So he's not looking for a recommendation to city council, but there is a resolution attached to this where the resolved clause is, the Environmental Commission supports the environmentally preferred procurement policy developed by staff for City Administrator Lazarus. So I'm sharing this with you, and whether you choose to take action tonight, or if you haven't had time to read it, push it off to another meeting, that's fine. And if there's any questions, I want to give credit to Colin Spencer, our procurement, the person who leads procurement, because it turns out he went off and built this off USDN, the Network of Sustainability Directors, created a playbook for environmentally preferable purchasing. And at the time that was developed, we didn't have stable staff in that position, but he went back to that. We appraised him of it, and he went back to that and built this policy off all that work that a bunch of other cities have worked together on. So sharing that.
I move the resolution.
Okay, is there a second? Commissioner Frenzel? All in favor?
Wait,
All right.
one question.
Oh, yeah.
In honor of John Sherman, does this mean that the city will phase out the purchase of biofuels derived from corn?
That is going to come to you in a more specific way. It's a great question. There was a resolution by council directing the administrator to bring back Green Fleet's policy, I believe, by January 1.
Very good.
And Nate Geisler is leading that effort, and I know there's been a bunch of internal pieces, but non-food crop fuels is
Very
one
good.
of the issues that they hope to get to. So ideally, they would bring a draft or some update to you in early December, because that would be the soonest, the latest they could do it before it goes to council.
Very good. Glad to hear it.
So, back to the motions.
My other question is for you, Matt.
Yeah.
And just in terms of, we often hear about how much work staff has to do already. They're already quite busy. My fear of sitting on these commissions and passing resolutions is always that we are widening the gap between the policies that we are trying to encourage and the actual workload that the staff needs to do. So this is a very subjective assessment that I'm asking for on your part. But does the moving forward of this particular policy help to bring those two places closer together or actually push them farther apart in terms of helping staff feel like they are empowered to make better decisions here versus feeling like they yet have another thing that they need to do in order to be able to satisfy our excitement
No.
as volunteers to try and create better government here?
I think this is good, and it moves us in the right direction in that it's a formal policy across all staff. Because certain parts of the organization, I think, really get this and do it very well, and others, it can be an afterthought. And now that we have a purchasing department that is paying attention to this, they can be a good guide to those other entities, and he reviews every RFP, so if he's not seeing environmental language, he can prompt them, and if they need help, so this may be a little more work for Nate or I, but I think overall, we can just point people in the right direction, where here's where you go for green paint products and things like that, so overall, I think this is a good move in the right direction.
Partially in response, just as when Councilmember Smith went to the city administrator about the green fleets policy quite a few months ago, I brought up a green purchasing policy with the administrator quite a few months ago. And in both circumstances, the administrator said, we don't. Okay, we'll do that. Like that was his immediate response. We should be, this is our ethic, this is what we should be doing. And so it is. And then the other point that I wanted to make, since Allison's not here, the Zero Waste Subcommittee has been working on a suite of different things. And one of the key directions that we decided to move through her leadership and those of other community members was to move forward a series of different portions of zero waste to move the organization in that direction before trying to push the organization towards a zero waste policy per se. So get community events to be zero waste, get the city to move towards greener purchasing policies in a stepwise fashion, as opposed to pushing some departments a little bit farther, a little bit faster than they might be comfortable with. So it plays into that in a way that I think is meaningful, but obviously we don't have a crystal ball on that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Did we vote?
No, not yet. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. We heartily support it.
Do you want a short update on the rest of staff?
Yeah.
So, Gelman, there is a separate rulemaking to set the standard for 1,4-dioxane just by itself, and that is likely to get done by October, which is when the second emergency order would end. Whether the whole big Part 201 package gets through depends on who you ask. So, but this group should know that the standard for 1,4-dioxane, what I'm hearing is it will likely go forward, it will be 7.2, and that will be finished. There's working with faculty at the University of Michigan, there's a case study for students. There's a group called Michigan Sustainability Cases. They have grant money to develop case studies. Rebecca Harden is the lead faculty member. They've developed a case study with Rita LaCaruso, some other faculty. I was involved on teaching students about the site. And we're working with them and the state to see whether we could flip that around and create a public-facing case to educate residents, because we constantly have new residents in the community who are surprised that this exists, didn't know, and I'd love a place to point residents, go here, learn about this before you come to the public meeting where we'll give you the update. So it's something we're working on. There's going to be a workshop next week with a bunch of Great Lakes cities run by Missy Stultz, Rebecca Esselman at the Watershed Council, trying to create vulnerability assessments for small to medium-sized Great Lakes cities with a climate and equity lens. Staffing, with recommendations from this group and Mr. Mirsky in his position as advisor to the administrator, there appears to be support for 2 full-time staff on community-facing programs. So a job description has been developed, and HR is looking at the salary range and all those things before it were posted, but that all seems to be moving forward, and we're hoping early next year we have staff, full-time staff in place. We're going to be going after a challenge grant with the Bloomberg Philanthropies. It's the Mayor's Challenge. 35 cities, 500 cities have signed up. We had an all-day facilitated session with a Bloomberg advisor who turns out to be a new faculty member at an architecture school, Mark Norman. And it was great. Good group of people. The administrator's decision was to focus on affordability in Ann Arbor. So while it's not my main area of focus, I am helping with Jen Hall, and we're going to be working on what's that big grand idea that Ann Arbor could do around affordable housing. It's due October 20th. Landfill, back to 1,4-dioxane, so we have 1,4-dioxane contamination at our old landfill. And in advance of the standard changing, we haven't delineated where 7.2 is in that area. We know where 85 is, and all of our sites are below 85. So we just did some sampling out in Mary Beth Doyle Park and a couple of other neighborhoods to the north, and those were all non-detect, so it's a good sign for us that this thing hasn't gotten, way far away. The highest number we have on the other side of 94 is 17 parts per billion, which is, there are no drinking water receptors there, so no one's exposed to it. But it's still something we have to do, so I'm just keeping you updated on that. Two other things, we're updating our hazard mitigation plan. I'm hoping to get a presentation for you because it's a formality that our emergency management people do, but in this case, Jerry Hancock, Jen Lawson, Rick Norman, our emergency manager, they've hired Stantec, and this will be done with a strong climate lens on it. So yes, we have tornadoes, yes, we have convective weather, but is climate going to make that worse? How do we start preparing? And it's really exciting. Stantec is doing some really good work, so I think you'll be pleased with what you see. And then I was in a capital planning meeting around solid waste today, and Tracy Artley was there, and the zero waste events at the stadium, I guess, are going very well, and a very large amount of compost material is showing up at our compost facility. And she said the contamination, her conversations with our operator are, it's very low. And because technically, when you're in the stadium, you have no landfill options, because everything there should go in recycling or compost. So the only thing we're finding is the stuff that people are sneaking in on their own, like liquor bottles and things like that. And she said in most of them, they're leaving under their seats, so it's not showing up, but that's the only, so it's a really good story so far from what I hear. And I'll stop there, unless people have questions about anything.
Okay, moving on to items for the next agenda. I'm going to add solid waste again to our agenda. And I was approached by a group of professors in the astronomy department. I know others have also talked to them about night sky and street lighting. So I have offered them a time to come and present to us. Are there other items? All right, our next scheduled meeting is October 26th. There's obviously nobody here for public comment. So if there is no,
I'm having surgery on October 20th. I will likely be here on the 26th, but I'm not sure.
okay,
Repairing a foot.
ooh. Hope that goes well.
Me too.
If there's no further business to come before the commission, the meeting will now adjourn at 8:44. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.